I thank the agent of Armenia for his statement, and I now invite Professor Shon Murphy to take the floor. You have the floor, Professor.
Thank you, Madam President. Members of the court, it's a great pleasure to appear before you and an honor to do so on behalf of the Republic of Armenia. As indicated by our agent, I will address the facts concerning the alleged laying of landmines and setting of booby traps in Azerbaijan that purportedly call for the court to issue provisional measures of protection. Madam President, allow me to start with Armenia's basic position regarding landmines, which is that since the end of the 44-day war, Armenia has carried out mine laying exclusively within the sovereign territory of Armenia for self-defense purposes only. This has been necessary because in May 2021, November 2021, and September 2022, Azerbaijan forcibly crossed the border into Armenia and seized Armenian territory. The map on your screen illustrates the territories of Armenia that were occupied by Azerbaijan and that remain occupied today. Along the border between the two countries, you see various places colored in purple, orange, and pink, where Azerbaijan's armed forces have crossed the border and seized pockets of Armenian territory. These attacks and their condemnation by the international community are well documented. For example, the European Parliament in May of 2021 adopted a resolution saying that troops from Armenia had, and I quote, entered the territory of Armenia, which amounts to a violation of the territorial integrity of Armenia and of international law, end of quote. French President Macron said that, and I quote, Azerbaijani armed forces have crossed into Armenian territory. They must withdraw immediately, end of quote. The list goes on. At the outset of such attacks, Armenia deemed it necessary to lay landmines within its territory for military defense purposes. Further, as you will see at paragraph 2 of tab 2 of your judge's folder, the Armenian Minister of Defense has concluded that the, and I quote, landmines displayed in the photographs provided to the court by the Azerbaijani government were taken by Azerbaijan from the sovereign territories of Armenia in the course of the aggression in 2021-2022, end of quote. Likewise, the Armenian Minister of Foreign Affairs stated last November, before Azerbaijan filed this request, the following, and I quote, it's on your screen, regarding Azerbaijan's declarations that the Armenian side has placed Armenian-made mines in Nagorno-Karabakh, I must underline that the mines displayed by Azerbaijan were found not in Nagorno-Karabakh, but in the sovereign territories of Armenia occupied in 2021-22, and they now are trying to use these mines for propaganda purposes. It is indeed notable that the photographs Azerbaijan has presented to the court typically show either a close-up of a landmine or landmines laid out in neat columns and rows. There are just 3 photographs that purport to show the clearing of a minefield, the location of which is not specified. Further, there is no statement from, for example, a combat engineer addressing how the landmines were removed without detonating them, or where exactly they were located when he or she removed them. There's nothing explaining how and why the landmines were transported by Azerbaijan from the alleged minefield to another location, so as to be laid out in those neat columns and rows. It is, of course, difficult for Armenia to prove to the court that Azerbaijan removed these landmines from Armenian territory. Armenia does not control the territory from which the landmines were taken, nor does it have access to information held only by Azerbaijan. And it's difficult for the Ministry of Defense to provide you with information beyond what you find at tab 2, given the sensitivities of such information in a situation involving armed conflict and occupation. At the same time, and to be candid, Madam President, it may be difficult for the court to agree with Armenia that the landmines in Azerbaijan's photographs were taken from Armenia, given the lack of evidence before you on that point beyond the clear and unequivocal position of the Armenian government expressed well before Azerbaijan submitted the request. So allow me to turn instead to the story that Azerbaijan tells the court, which under close scrutiny simply falls apart. And because it falls apart, I respectfully submit that the court should once again, as it did in December 2021, feel compelled to reject Azerbaijan's request. Madam President, Azerbaijan's story begins with a broad and vague assertion that Armenian armed forces deliberately continued to lay landmines in or after 2021 in civilian zones, and indeed planted such landmines for no conceivable military purpose and in unequivocally civilian areas. When exactly this happened, by what exact means, and by who exactly are all left very unclear. The overall geographic context is important when scrutinizing Azerbaijan's story. To understand the context, perhaps a good place to start is the end of the 44-day war, the trilateral statement, and the map on your screen. The trilateral statement of November 2020 provided that 3 districts formerly under the control of the Republic of Artsakh be returned to Azerbaijan. The Kalbajar district, referred to on this map as the Kalbajar region, was to be returned by 15 November 2020. The deadline for doing so was extended to 25 November, and it was returned to Azerbaijan's control by that date. The Agdam district, shown on this map as the Agdam region, was to be returned by 20 November 2020, and it was returned to Azerbaijan's control by that date. The Lachen district, shown on this map as the Lachen region, was to be returned by 1 December 2020, and it was returned to Azerbaijan's control by that date. There is no evidence before the court to the contrary. Rather, all relevant sources indicate that these districts were returned to Azerbaijan in late 2020. The only caveat is that the Russian peacekeepers were deployed into a relatively small portion of the Lachen district that we refer to as the Lachen corridor. So when Azerbaijan says to the court in broad terms that starting 5 months ago, it discovered more than approximately 2,700 landmines in the Kalbajar and Lachen districts, which is its central claim in this request, it is saying that it has discovered landmines in districts over which it has had control since the end of 2020. Yet how anyone, including Armenian armed forces, were somehow able to surreptitiously enter such districts so as to transport and lay landmines on such a scale in supposedly civilian areas right under the nose of Azerbaijan is quite the mystery. That alone casts grave doubt upon the overall story that Azerbaijan is spinning before you. Another fact that does not sit well with Azerbaijan's story is the following. Other than withdrawing from these 3 districts by those specific dates, the trilateral statement did not require Armenian armed forces to withdraw from their locations on 10 November 2020. Rather, the parties to the conflict agreed to stop in their current positions, with the withdrawal of Armenian armed forces only occurring later. Nor did the trilateral statement say anything about a withdrawal or demobilization of the Nagorno-Karabakh Defense Army. Thus, after the 44-day war, there remained armed forces in Nagorno-Karabakh and Azerbaijan armed forces on the perimeter of Nagorno-Karabakh. Indeed, under the trilateral statement, the Russian peacekeeping contingent was to be deployed not just in the Lachen corridor, but also along the line of contact in Nagorno-Karabakh between these armed forces. So, what we had after the end of the 44-day war was a contact line along the perimeter of Nagorno-Karabakh at which were positioned opposing military forces. Further, the trilateral statement called for a ceasefire and termination of hostilities, but it did not preclude armed forces from taking whatever other steps they deemed necessary to hold their positions. Madam President, if any landmines were laid along the contact line, those landmines were laid for defensive purposes, just as they had been so laid along the line of contact resulting after the First Nagorno-Karabakh War. Such landmines would have nothing to do with an effort to harm civilians. As I previously noted, Azerbaijan claims that starting in August 2022, it found more than approximately 2,700 landmines. Of those, it claims that over half of these landmines, specifically 1,614 landmines, were found near 3 villages, which Azerbaijan says are unequivocally civilian areas. So right at the start, we have an interesting concession from Azerbaijan, which is that some 40% of the approximately 2,700 landmines supposedly found in Azerbaijan since last August were not in unequivocally civilian areas. Now, in assessing the claim that approximately 2,700 landmines have been found since August 2022, of which only 60% were purportedly found in unequivocally civilian areas, the timing, the circumstances, and the location of these alleged discoveries merit close scrutiny. I start with the issue of timing. August 2022 is not just a random month. Rather, it is a month when Azerbaijan launched what it called Operation Revenge. In that operation, Azerbaijan violated the trilateral statement by using its armed forces to breach the contact line so as to seize partial control of Nagorno-Karabakh. Specifically, Azerbaijan seized control of certain strategic military positions, including those on and around Sarababa Mountain or Ridge, which you can find now on your screen. The left side of the screen shows a map of the entire region. The gray-toned area in the center of that map is the area under the control of Nagorno-Karabakh. If you trace the line along the western edge of Nagorno-Karabakh heading southward, the first annotation you find is Sarababa. This is where Sarababa Mountain or Ridge is located, and we've provided a close-up of this portion of the map on the right side of the screen. The Sarababa Ridge is one of a number of dominant heights along the Karabakh Ridge of the Little Caucasus mountain range. If you turn to tab 3 of your judges' folders, you will find the August 3rd, 2022 information bulletin issued by the Russian Ministry of Defense regarding its peacekeeping activities. Azerbaijan's unlawful seizure of the Sarababa Ridge is readily apparent from this information bulletin, which says at paragraph 3 that, and I quote, "In the area of the height of Sarababa, the ceasefire regime was violated by the armed forces of Azerbaijan." End of quote. At tab 4 of your judge's folder, you will find the information bulletin for the next day, August 4th, which refers to the line of contact. That's at paragraph 3, and reports that as a result of Azerbaijan's operation, there were at least 2 deaths and 14 injured of the Nagorno-Karabakh armed forces. Madam President, counsel for Azerbaijan this morning attempted to pretend that there no longer exists a contact line separating armed forces and that the contact line somehow disappeared in late 2020. But the peacekeepers' bulletins tell a very different story. Further, the situation of August 3rd, 2022, was reported at the time by Azerbaijan as a military operation. I invite you to turn to tab 5 of your judge's folder, which contains the statement issued on August 3rd by the Azerbaijan Ministry of Defense. Here, the Azerbaijan Ministry of Defense stated that Armenian armed groups tried to seize certain heights so as to establish new combat positions. But as a result of the retaliatory Operation Revenge, units of the Azerbaijan army seized control of Sarababa and a number of other important commanding heights along the Karabakh Ridge of the Little Caucasus mountain system. Moreover, the ministry said that the Azerbaijan army destroyed several combat positions of illegal Armenian armed elements, even carrying out an airstrike, killing Armenian militants and destroying their howitzers, their military vehicles, their ammunition. Azerbaijani President Aliyev himself later said the operation was in the exercise of his role as commander-in-chief. And it is in the days after this Azerbaijani military operation, which seized important commanding heights along the Karabakh Ridge, that Azerbaijan announced it had discovered landmines. Indeed, the Azerbaijani Ministry of Defense on August 16th, 2022, issued a press release stating that the Azerbaijan army had discovered an anti-personnel minefield in the northwestern direction of Sarababa Hill. Yet there's no mention at all in that press release of these landmines being located in or near a civilian settlement. Azerbaijan's assertion that it was provoked by enemy forces into exacting revenge convinced no one, most notably the Russian peacekeepers. But the key point is, on any account, in August 2022, there were military operations by military forces to seize strategic heights from other military forces along the mountainous ridges that included Sarababa Mountain. And having seized these strategic heights, this is the point in time when suddenly Azerbaijan says it has found lots of landmines. In fact, of the 1,614 landmines supposedly found in unequivocally civilian areas, 80% are found in August, just after Azerbaijan crossed the line of contact and seized territory. In its request, Azerbaijan presents to you photographs of landmines laid out in neat rows and columns. Those photographs are inescapably associated with Azerbaijan's seizure of Sarababa Ridge. Indeed, the press release the Azerbaijani Ministry of Defense issued on August 16, 2022 about the seizure of Sarababa included the photograph that you now see on your screen. If that photograph looks familiar, it's because Azerbaijan presents it to you now at page 9 of its Annex 10 as evidence of alleged laying of landmines by Armenia in civilian areas. In other words, back in August 2022, these mines are the spoils of a successful military operation. Today, they're evidence of laying of landmines in unequivocally civilian areas. All evidence contemporaneous to August 2022 points to landmines in this location being a consequence of military operations. The Caspian News on August 17, 2022 published virtually the exact same photograph as appears at figure 2 on page 12 of Azerbaijan's request. The relevant figure 2 photograph from that request now appears on the screen. When describing this scene, the Caspian News reported that, and I'll quote, "The armed forces of Azerbaijan discovered a minefield in the northwestern direction of the recently liberated Sarababa high ground," end of quote. Moreover, the Caspian News reported that, again I'll quote, "the mined area was within the perimeter of the temporary monitoring zone of the Russian peacekeepers in Azerbaijan," end of quote. In other words, these landmines were purportedly discovered along the contact line between military forces. As such, these landmines have nothing, absolutely nothing to do with targeting of civilians. Indeed, the August 2022 Caspian News report says nothing about laying landmines in a civilian area. And that's true of the other August 2022 news reports relating to the alleged finding of landmines. The lack of any reference in August 2022 to the laying of landmines in civilian areas makes sense when you look at all the related photographs of these landmines. Let's start with the photograph from figure 2 of Azerbaijan's request, which is still on your screen. Notice the countryside in the background. It's clearly showing an open and barren area with no civilian structures of any kind in the background. Let's take a look at a different photograph found in an article published by an Azerbaijani news agency called News AZ from this past November, which is entitled "Foreign Military Attachés in Azerbaijan to Inspect Minefield Set Up by Armenia in Sarababa High Ground." This same photograph in black and white appears in Azerbaijan's evidence at Annex 8. As you can see, it's a mountainous area with no civilian activity in sight. A different angle of this same scene appeared in an article by the Azerbaijani news agency Azer News from November 2022, which is entitled "Russian-Turkish Military Observers Inspect Minefield in Sarababa Peak." From this angle, we get a pretty good look at the overall terrain, which is quite mountainous, as one would expect, and completely devoid of civilians or civilian structures. Actually, all of the photographs presented by Azerbaijan relating to landmines show locations that are devoid of villages or structures of any kind. How Azerbaijan can regard these photographs as demonstrating the laying of landmines in civilian areas is yet another mystery. Needless to say, if there are no civilians around in the places where landmines are laid, then it's rather hard to argue that any such landmines are targeting civilians, let alone civilians of a particular ethnicity. If this is ethnic cleansing, it's of a type never seen before. Azerbaijan's map evidence, when you look closely, tells the same story. Rather than minefields to be found scattered across Kalbajar and Lachin districts, the minefields identified are all at or proximate to lines of contact. On your screen now is the map contained in Annex 9 of Azerbaijan's request, with a small annotation by us at the lower right indicating the location of the old Lachin corridor. Counsel for Azerbaijan this morning assiduously avoided showing you this map, perhaps because they belatedly realized how damaging it is to their request. In any event, Azerbaijan presented this map supposedly to show 7 locations of minefields laid by Armenian armed forces in the Republic of Azerbaijan's territory. Now, none of these locations, as you can see, are located in the Lachin corridor. This slide is rather crowded to read, so let me take you to the portion of the slide identifying minefields at locations numbers 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, this part of the map is similar to the map Azerbaijan showed you this morning from its Annex 28, Appendix A, although that map strips out the annotations that you find on this map. You see here 4 locations of alleged minefields. They are all along the contact line between the Azerbaijani forces and the forces of Nagorno-Karabakh, the latter area shown in the darker tone on the right of your screen. Let's start with the bottom location. We're told from the annotation that the minefield associated with number 4 was supposedly found in August 2022. If you follow the arrow across the map, it lands you at a location labeled as Sarababa M. This is the same Sarababa mountain or ridge that I mentioned before, the one that Azerbaijan seized in combat in August 2022. Who, are we told by this annotation, was harmed by a landmine there? A military serviceman, not a civilian. Indeed, the annotations on this map refer exclusively to servicemen, not civilians. Notice that the map depicts also in this vicinity a village named Ikinci Ipak, which the annotation for number 4 says is found in the Lachin district. In other words, in an area that was returned to Azerbaijan as of December 2020. This is one of the 3 villages that Azerbaijan highlights in its request, saying that 1,614 landmines were found near the 3 villages and thus in unequivocally civilian areas. Yet when Azerbaijan says that the landmines were laid near ikinci ipak, it is referring to this area of Sarababa Mountain, which is along the line of contact. Indeed, Azerbaijan never says in its request that it found a minefield in one of the three villages or even around one of the three villages. Rather, it consistently says near a village. And when you read Azerbaijan's evidence closely, in this instance, Azerbaijan says it found the minefield 1.8 kilometers to the east of ikinci ipak village. Indeed, notice on this map, the geographic coordinates for the minefield indicated at the number 4 annotation are completely different from the geographic coordinates appearing just below ikinci ipak village. As an aside, I note that this method of geographic coordinates dates back to the era of the Soviet Union. In essence, prior to Azerbaijan's Operation Revenge, Azerbaijan's evidence essentially indicates that there were armed forces on the Sarababa Ridge protecting Nagorno-Karabakh. There was a minefield somewhere on the slope of the ridge for defensive purposes. The Azerbaijan army was controlling the base of the ridge at the edge of the Lachen district. And behind the Azerbaijan army, there was the ikinci ipak village. Once the Azerbaijan army, in August of 2022, seizes the ridge, it dug up the mines located on the slope. Moreover, if you look at a table that Azerbaijan presents at Annex 7 of its request, and specifically at page 4 of that table, you see an interesting fact. Of the 1,614 landmines that Azerbaijan says were found near 3 villages, all but five of those landmines were found in this location, in the so-called area of this village. In other words, of the landmines supposedly laid in unequivocally civilian areas, 99% of them are located here. Thus, the heart of Azerbaijan's entire request relating to landmines relates to this single location, at and along the Sarababa Ridge, and to the discovery of landmines after Azerbaijan's military forcefully seized the ridge in August of 2022. Now let's turn to the minefield associated with number 3 on the map, which is immediately to the north of the minefield I just discussed, and which was also, according to the annotation, found in August of 2022. The annotation for this number 3 says the minefield was discovered by the Azerbaijan military. The annotation makes no reference to civilian harm. Further, it says the minefield is in the direction of Birinci ipak village, which again, the notation says is in the Lachen district, and thus in an area that has been under Azerbaijan's control since December of 2020. This is the second village that Azerbaijan highlights in its request, and Azerbaijan asserts that just 50 persons used to live in these 2 villages. Now, for this village of Birinci ipak, again notice that the geographic coordinates given for the minefield are completely different from those given for the village. We estimate that this village is 2.4 kilometers from the minefield that Azerbaijan asserts that it found. Moreover, while the annotation on this map for number 3 indicates that mines were found in the direction of Birinci İpek village, the table that Azerbaijan presents in Annex 7 contains no listing for landmines found in the area of this village. This further demonstrates that the alleged minefield is not actually associated with the village, with a village. On this map, the minefield is in the direction of Birinci İpek village, but on Azerbaijan's Annex 7 table, there are no mines in the area of this village. Now please turn to the minefield associated with number 5 on Azerbaijan's map. This minefield apparently was also found in August of 2022 and is described as being southeast of a mountain. There's no reference to a civilian settlement in the annotation. Who found these landmines? Military servicemen. What types of mines were they? They included anti-tank mines. As the court's no doubt aware, anti-tank mines do not detonate when stepped on by a person. They only detonate when something heavy, like a tank, weighs down on the landmine. So one might ask, why would armed forces go to the trouble of laying anti-tank mines for the purpose of harming villagers? Now consider the minefield purportedly associated with number 2, which we are told by the annotation was also found in August of 2022. It's described as being on nameless heights, which certainly does not sound like a civilian settlement. The only harm indicated was to a military person, not a civilian. From the table at Azerbaijan's Annex 7, we learn that a total of 5 mines make up this minefield. Although it's not shown on this map, Azerbaijan's other evidence places the 3rd village that Azerbaijan highlights, the Balipaya village, to the south of these nameless heights. We estimate that this village is 2.5 kilometers from the minefield that Azerbaijan asserts it found. So, these 4 minefields and the 3 villages near some of them were all found along the line of contact on a series of mountainous ridges separating opposing military forces. Madam President, Azerbaijan does not emphasize the final locations from this Annex 9 map of minefields. But it may be helpful for the court to briefly consider these other locations, as this map is definitely showing minefields along lines of contact between opposing military forces. So here again is an enlarged portion of Azerbaijan's Annex 9 map, this time showing alleged minefields at locations numbers 1, number 6, and number 7. All these locations are at or near the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Numbers 6 and 7 are places where there have been active hostilities between Armenia and Azerbaijan since the end of the 44-day war, while number 1 is a place where only 4 mines were found. In short, all the evidence before you, whether it's in the form of reports, photographs, maps, or otherwise, demonstrates that if any landmines were laid in the areas as claimed by Azerbaijan, they were laid between opposing forces for defensive purposes along the strategic heights of the contact line or along an international border, and were not laid in civilian areas. Thus, they were not laid for any reason related to the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. Madam President, aside from the fact that laying landmines for purposes of military defense is not unlawful, we note the lack of any attribution of conduct here to Armenia. If Azerbaijan's position is that the NKR or its army laid these landmines, we respond that with respect to the time period at issue in this request, Armenia does not exercise control over either the NKR or its army, and there is no evidence before the court to suggest otherwise. Further, there's no evidence that the Republic of Armenia, in this time period, instructed or directed the NKR or its army to lay the particular minefields asserted by Azerbaijan. Moreover, since the end of the 44-day war, Armenia has not provided any armaments or ammunition to Nagorno-Karabakh. The Cherigov case referred to this morning, which was issued in 2015, and which was applying a jurisdictional standard, not a standard of attribution, says nothing to the contrary. As such, any NKR conduct in this regard cannot be attributed to Armenia. So to conclude on the issue of landmines, no doubt there were incidents of civilians on all sides who have been hurt by landmines, as suggested by the injuries to the telecommunications workers recounted in Azerbaijan's Annex 25. Of course, everyone, including the government of Armenia, regrets such incidental harm, but those accounts of harm are endemic across the region, a product of mines laid by many actors, including the government of Azerbaijan, in many places for defensive purposes over a period of 30 years. Madam President, members of the court, allow me to turn to the issue of booby traps. First, the location of these alleged booby traps is very different than that of the alleged minefields. Azerbaijan's counsel this morning tended to conflate the issue of minefields and booby traps, but these two matters are occurring in entirely different places. The alleged minefields are located exclusively outside the Lachin corridor, while the alleged booby traps were supposedly found solely within the old Lachin corridor. As the court knows, the trilateral statement provided that a new road would be built connecting Nagorno-Karabakh to Armenia. Once completed, the Russian peacekeepers relocated from the old Lachin corridor to the new road, and Azerbaijan was allowed to take control of certain settlements that were within the old Lachin corridor, notably the town of Birdzor, or Lachin, and the villages of Ahravno, or Zabuk, and Sus. Yesterday, multiple counsel for Azerbaijan insisted strenuously that the Lachin corridor is under the exclusive control of the Russian peacekeeping contingent. But today, Azerbaijan's claim is that the Armenian armed forces somehow deployed into the Lachen corridor to set booby traps without any detection by the Russian peacekeeping contingent. There's simply no evidence of this happening. Certainly, there's nothing in the bulletins issued by the peacekeeping contingent indicating anything of that nature. And equally certain, this is not Armenian territory, such that any reference to the Corfu Channel case is quite misplaced. Second, and to be absolutely clear, Armenia denies setting any booby traps in civilian homes or settlements. The armed forces of Armenia do not use booby traps. As you can see at tab 2 of your folder, in the final paragraph, the Armenian Minister of Defense confirms that such devices are too unpredictable and ineffective for military operations, and depending on their use, may not be consistent with international humanitarian law, a position fully consistent with that taken by the ICRC. Third, there's simply no evidence before the court that the armed forces of Armenia somehow, despite the presence of the Russian peacekeepers, trained or otherwise controlled others in the Lachen corridor so as to set booby traps. As such, any reference to the Nicaragua versus United States case is misguided. Nor is there any evidence that the armed forces of Armenia supplied others in this regard. Indeed, the munitions shown in Azerbaijan's photographs are mostly not of the type used by Armenian armed forces. So to answer my good friend Mr. Lowe's simple question of this morning as to why the governor of Armenia doesn't tell Azerbaijan where any booby traps are located, our simple answer is that we didn't have anything to do with such booby traps. Fourth, booby traps can be set by anyone with munitions experience. Most males in this region have military experience, even if they're not on active duty. Moreover, persons forced to flee from their homes might well set a booby trap, particularly if motivated by anger and nothing else. Recall that Azerbaijan's President Aliyev explicitly demanded that Armenians leave these settlements. We know that at least a few such persons set fire to their homes before fleeing, as Azerbaijan's own evidence demonstrates. At the same time, these acts of destruction to homes were actively discouraged by Armenian and Nagorno-Karabakh authorities. Fifth, the very few photographs presented by Azerbaijan of these booby traps tell their own story. These booby traps clearly are not professionally done. They're crude, ad hoc, irregular, unsophisticated, and jerry-rigged contraptions of what appear to be rusty and dated parts. Any professional army seeking to set explosives would certainly not do it in this way. Rather, these contraptions have all the hallmarks of angry lone wolves concocting self-made devices. And in terms of the number of booby traps, other than what's in its few photographs, Azerbaijan never actually provides a number of booby traps allegedly found, instead preferring, particularly in its Annex 22, to conflate the issue with the finding of unexploded remnants of war, whether in the form of ordnance or otherwise. Finally, even Azerbaijan does not know who set the booby traps of which it complains. Its position is that because these traps were constructed with military equipment, they must have been planted by or with the cooperation of Armenia's armed forces. Well, actually, in a region that has experienced numerous armed conflicts over some 3 decades, there's quite a bit of military equipment lying around and plenty of persons who know how to use it, such that it does not make sense to say that only Armenia is able to do this. And it's certainly not a sufficient basis for attributing responsibility to a state for a very serious charge. In short, Azerbaijan's accusations in this respect consist simply of fragments of evidence augmented by conjecture, piled on top of supposition, and should therefore not be accepted by the court. Before concluding, Madam President, I wish to make a last observation about whether the facts Azerbaijan has placed before you are really new, as insisted this morning by counsel for Azerbaijan and as required under your rules. While Azerbaijan represents to the court that it recently located minefields, Azerbaijan's own evidence reflects that out of the approximately 2,700 landmines that were allegedly discovered since August 2022, approximately 86% of them were in fact discovered in August and September, meaning more than 4 months ago. In short, not so recent. Moreover, Azerbaijan's letter to Armenia of September 15, 2022, and Azerbaijan's letter to the court of September 22, 2022, characterized the discovery of these minefields as a violation of the court's December 2021 order. In other words, Azerbaijan maintained that the laying of these alleged minefields, purportedly of landmines manufactured in 2021, was already a matter addressed in your December 2021 order, which means that they are not new facts that allow for a fresh request for provisional measures of protection. And in saying that last September, Azerbaijan did not reserve any rights to pursue a new request. To the same effect, in its recent memorial, which counsel referred to this morning and even placed evidence from it on the screen, in that memorial, Azerbaijan extensively discusses the alleged laying of these landmines starting in August of 2022 and continuing to this day as a breach of your existing order and as pertinent to the merits phase, not as new facts meriting attention by this court on a preliminary basis. Azerbaijan cannot have it both ways. And much of the evidence that Azerbaijan places before you today relates to matters long past. Many of the faces that you see in Azerbaijan's Annex 23 are the same faces that you saw in Annex 37 of Azerbaijan's first request for provisional measures filed in September 2021. Those photos at Azerbaijan's Annex 24 in this request of property damage in the Lachin Quarter appear to be mostly war-related damage from significant military operations long past, not from recent booby traps or even mines. In short, Azerbaijan is, to some extent, repackaging old information for this request. Madam President, members of the court, I close by noting that on Armenia's own evidence, Azerbaijan's own evidence, Armenia supposedly engaged in indiscriminate use of mines and indiscriminately planted landmines and indiscriminately deployed mines. If so, then it would suggest that Armenia did not engage in an act of discrimination within the meaning of the CERD. But importantly, Armenia did nothing of this kind. Armenia only planted landmines in its own territory for self-defense. But even if landmines were laid as Azerbaijan would have it, any such conduct by whoever did it, from all the evidence before you, would only have been done as a defensive measure undertaken along borders or lines of contact and without any purpose of harming persons of a particular ethnic origin. And who laid crude booby traps within the Lachin Quarter is a question that even Azerbaijan cannot answer. All told, these facts simply provide no basis for the request Azerbaijan has placed before you. Finally, for the sake of completeness, I recall that in the aftermath of the 44-day war, Armenia handed over to Azerbaijan any maps in its possession relating to minefields that were not in Armenia. And because Armenia is not withholding maps, and because it is only laying mines for defensive purposes, and because it has no connection to booby traps, Azerbaijan's request is clearly moot and presents no issue of urgency. Madam President, I thank you for your attention. I ask that you now call upon Professor Kolb to continue Armenia's presentation.
I thank Professor Murphy for his statement, and I now invite Professor Robert Kolb to take the floor. You have the floor, Professor.